What's going on, players and collectors? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing obviously another truck video here. Hopefully this is a quick one, but I've had the question asked to me recently, and it got me thinking about, can indie TCGs succeed in this market? And the question largely came up. I was talking to one of my buddies about, trading card games. We both play Lorcon and Pokemon, but he sees that I do content creation for all these other games, and in particular, he was asking about Mythic TCG, and so we got talking about Mythic TCG, and the question eventually came up is, will it last? I don't want to invest in something if it's not going to last, is what he said. So naturally, I always say, I have faith in these games. These games that I put money and stuff into, money and time into, I wouldn't do it if I think they're just going to collapse in a year or so. But my outlook on TCGs is a little bit different than most people's. I've come to realize too, because I don't look at TCGs as investment opportunities, like to make money and stuff. So like a TCG to me is, I'm a player and a collector more than I am anything else. And, that to me means that I want to play a game that's going to be fun, and I want something that I'm going to enjoy collecting. So, he's asking me, is it going to last? And I'm sitting here going like, yeah, absolutely. And, started talking about some of the ways where I think Mythic's going to stay around. And it got me thinking I should just probably make a video on this, because I know other people have the questions too. Will indie TCG succeed, and do they have what it takes to last in this market? Because let's be honest, this is a down economy, down market. People aren't collecting as much as they used to anymore. I think players across TCGs are kind of up, but collectors, I feel like, have kind of taken a step back, But we've also gotten the wrong idea, the wrong impressions from the COVID Kickstarter boom era, where everybody decided that all these new TCGs should be their new personal investment, something they thought they were going to pad their 401ks and retirements, on, and I don't know. But, the big question, can these indie TCGs succeed in this market? And my answer is yes. There's certain TCGs that I think can and will, and arguably already have been succeeding in this market. And I think, there's a handful of TCGs that will continue to be successful. With the Kickstarter era, we got so many new TCGs. I want to say a plethora, but that would be, factually incorrect. But there's been hundreds of new TCGs, new games that have dropped since the Kickstarter boom and all that happened, since MetaZoo started. And Flesh and Blood, honestly, Flesh and Blood was kind of the real start to it all, even though they did things differently, but that's part of why they succeeded too, There's just a lot of games out there. There's a lot of things trying to vie for people's attention. Now that we've seen games like MetaZoo kind of flop and fall apart, people have started asking the questions, like, why should we trust the indie TCG game scene and all that? And again, I think the outlook is different. You're not supposed to look at these as investment opportunities. Am I going to make my money back and all that? Don't get me wrong. That is definitely a part of it. And, people wanting to have a good secondary market, or a good market in general for games, that's part of a healthy TCG. So I'm not trying to dismiss it or downplay it or anything like that, right? But there's certain things that indie TCGs today need to have or become in order to succeed, and it's become very apparent. Games that are literally just mimics of other games are not gonna succeed. And we saw that largely with MetaZoo. It very much lived in the shadow of Pokemon, right? It felt like Pokemon, it kind of looked like Pokemon, and they kind of try to follow the same path, arguably, as to what Pokemon was today, in today's world, modern. And it succeeded for a short time, because it was, I want to say it was a fake or a fraud because the game obviously does not have its own persona. It's the people behind it, but it was a game that was trying to live in the shadows of another franchise, a successful franchise like Pokemon. And at some point, you got to step out from that shadow and, make it or break it. And they unfortunately broke. So other Kickstarter games that came out were just too niche or, too out there to really have a generalized audience. And we've seen them all kind of go down. But there's games that are around right now that are surviving. And not only that, but I would argue they're succeeding. And if you look back at old vintage Pokemon and vintage Magic, when these games started out, they were slow rollers. They did not come out exploding onto the scene. They did not come out, guns blazing and just took the world by storm. And, games didn't just come to pass and then successfully make millions of dollars right away. It took years and years and years. Look at Magic. I mean, it was around for, at least a decade before it started to really fly and blow up. It's probably a little bit less than that, actually. But Pokemon kind of the same way. You had the video games and stuff that already built the foundation of what Pokemon was. It was already something that was kind of sweeping across the nations, And then they start their TCG. And even then, their TCG was not that popular at first. And it took a while. The TCG... even kind of died down for a while, if it was today, if Pokemon had started today and they experienced that kind of dip now, people would be dumping the game. They would be burning it, calling it a fraud, and just getting rid of it completely. And it probably wouldn't succeed. But it did succeed because it's, they took their time. They tried the organic growth route. They built their game into something that people wanted to play and collect instead of investment opportunities. Like, people didn't just buy that stuff to invest back then either. I'm sure there were some, but that's far from the majority of people, right? And that's kind of the thing, it was very slow and methodical for Magic the Gathering and Pokemon and even Yu-Gi-Oh, slow and methodical, organic growth, get going and just keep the train moving. Doesn't matter how slow it's going, as long as you keep it moving, you're building up a little bit of steam, it's gonna go. And that's what they did, The games today are they're trying to live off of hype. They're trying to get hype and then make that, their cannon shot. They're loading everything up into this hype ball, hoping that it would blow up and send them flying, and hope that they could continue to fly afterwards without knowing how to fly or, even doing the basic things like building wings or, something like that. So there's a lot of reasons TCGs have been failing recently. But like I said, there are some TCGs that are building themselves for success. And I'm going to talk about Mythic because that's my preferred game. I know that's not everybody's preferred game. It's a smaller game, but let me explain why. Mythic, to me, is very original in that there's not really any other game out there that does things based off mythology and history. You can argue Magic to an extent because, let's be honest here, Magic has touched everything at this point. I mean, look, they literally just did an Assassin's Creed thing. They did... or they're doing an anime set, or maybe it was just their secret layers thing. I don't remember what kind of drop it was, but they've literally done everything from old vintage, Carnage to I think it's like Miku Hatsune or something like that. They're doing stuff with. It's nuts. It's crazy. So Magic is kind of an anomaly in that regard, but there's not really a card game that's successful out there, or at least well known, that is doing mythology or historical based stuff. So in my opinion, they have that originality. They're not living in someone's shadow. They're not trying to be a game that's like anybody else. And that's the other aspect too, is their gameplay is different. it's kind of a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh! And a little bit of Magic, and they sprinkle some of those familiar elements into it, but the game itself is largely, it's different. It's not any other game. You can't really say it's any other game. So it's got its own originality, which to me makes it stand out. And that's one of the big things that TCGs nowadays have to do to really succeed, is that you've got to be original, and you've got to be different than everybody else. And we're kind of seeing that. Think about games like Alpha Clash, Sorcery, even like games like Primal TCG, they're all becoming pretty successful, especially like Sorcery, right? It's a game that is entirely on its own. It doesn't even play like a traditional card game. In my opinion, it's more of a board game. I know that's not factually what it is. It does classify as a trading card game, but the way the board state is, and the way you move your cards, and how you attack and do, like, you actually play the game, it feels more like a board game. I don't know of any other card game, like a traditional card game, that does that. So they have this uniqueness to them. And then their card arts are very familiar. They look a lot like something you'd see in vintage Magic, or even in Flesh and Blood. But also it's got its own unique touch to it in personality, and it makes it very different. So while it feels somewhat familiar, it is very, very different in its own thing. And, it's weird. Maybe I should do another video on just Sorcery as a whole. I'm not a huge fan of Sorcery TCG. I just don't like the gameplay, and it's not a knock on the game. Like, the game is not bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's got a large following, and it's one of the fastest growing games out there right now. It's just the game itself is not for me. I like traditional card games. I'm not much of a board game kind of person. So that game to me just isn't as fun to play as something like Mythic. But Sorcery TCG is just, it's making a great case for all other indie TCGs, in my opinion, to be able to be successful. And it should show to everybody out there who's, into trading card games and looking at it, that these games can be successful. They really can be if you give them the time of day, you just check them out. And one of the reasons that, a lot of these indie games are just having a hard time succeeding in regards to, like, people picking them up and all that, is there's just so much negativity right now about the card market and about indie TCGs because of what happened to MetaZoo and all these other games that, came and, floundered. But nobody's really actually looking at these games and giving them a chance. That's part of the problem. Like I said, the uniqueness is there for a lot of these games. They have their own IPs. They've got their own things going on. Alpha Clash, they're superheroes and villains, right? There's no other card game out there that's really doing it. I mean, you could argue there's some Marvel game or some DC game or something like that, but let's be honest, they're all trash. Alpha Clash is doing something nobody else is doing. They kind of took on something that nobody else is doing, and they're succeeding with it, right? And that's a big reason why. But it's also, their marketing, and they're not trying to just explode with a little bit of hype and ride that wave out until it fades. Like, they're trying to create little explosions of hype all the time. And they're trying to just use that to build up what they've already got there, and put in place. And, I think they're going to succeed. I think Alpha Clash is going to be here for a little while too. But I think, Mythic TCG, Sorcery, Alpha Clash, Nostalgics, Primal, like all these games, Soul Masters even, they're a brand new one. They're just now coming out with their actual trading card game side of things. And they're blowing up right now. They're getting big. They've done things differently than all these other games. They come out with these art packs and these concept arts and put all these things out there. People loved it, started grabbing onto it. They've built their own market already, all self-funded, and it's just, they're doing things so much different than everybody else, and now they're building the actual TCG piece to it, and it's becoming super successful. So, yes, to answer the question again, yes, I think TCGs can and have been successful in this market, and I think they will continue to be successful. People just have to not look at everything as a monetary thing. When you invest in something, even Sorcery TCG, right, as popular and up there as they are, you can't buy into them and expect to make money. Like, it's not a guarantee. They could fold today and you would lose every penny, and you have to be okay with that. Same thing could happen to Pokemon and Magic, though, right? It's less likely to happen. But people who are into Pokemon or into Magic love those games and they love those cards. They've been, built into their lifestyles now for so long that if those games died, they would still likely be played. I mean, look at the Harry Potter TCG. It's still being played 20 years after it died, and they shut doors down for that too. I mean, that's what it's all about. You got to have people that genuinely love the game and love to collect, not for the money, right? And I think if people started just looking at it that way, it would go better. It would go better. But there's another thing I kind of want to talk about with this too, is you've got all these content creators and influencers that own game shops or they sell online, whatnot, drip, whatever. They sell product. They're looking at these things from a business monetary standpoint, and they're not necessarily looking at it at face value. What is this game? Does it look good? Does it play good? Is it original? What are these things? They're only looking at things of, does this make me money or not, right? And it's a very generalized way of saying it. That's not necessarily the case for everybody. But I do watch a lot of Market Watch, and I love watching game stores that have content creation channels. I love watching them to see what they do in their stores, especially when it comes to the indie TCG games. And there's, you got people out there like Rudy, like Kitchen Table TCG. There's so many more. The Yu-Gi-Oh guy, I can't remember his name. He's really fun to watch too. They all put their market watches out there, and I'm not saying anything bad about them either, because I still enjoy watching their content. But they have this perspective, and they kind of put it out there too, that like their perspective is that of a game store owner, shop owner. And they're looking at the consumer side as a business, where we are looking at the consumer side as players and collectors. And that's something people have to learn to differentiate as well, because somebody like Kitchen Table TCG, Louie over there, or Rudy, Rudy's a great example of just, if it's not making him money, he's dumping it. He's straight up just dumping it, and he's trying to ruin the game, right? I'm not saying Louie's doing that, but Rudy does that. Louie, he's got all the stuff that, and he does great content too. He puts it all out there for his game store, and he talks about these things, the market watches and stuff, but he's talking about them as a business. And while I agree with some of his perspectives, I don't agree with all of them, because again, I'm looking at it from a player collector consumer standpoint. He's looking at it from a business consumer standpoint. So they differ. They're not the same. If it was straight up just, hey, is this game fun? Does it look good? Is it original? Is it, whatever? Then I think perspectives from these businesses would change. But they're looking at them from, is this going to make me money? And that's where the real disconnect, I think, from those come from. But that's all I really want to say, guys. I got thinking about that the other day, talking to my buddy about Mythic, and yes, he is going to give Mythic a go and try it out, and we're building some decks, and I'm getting some people locally to start getting into Mythic. So just try out these local games. You take them to your game store and try them out. That's one thing too, is I'm seeing Mythic and Nostalgic's TCG in local game stores more than I am seeing Sorcery and Nom Nom or Grand Archive or Chronicles of Arcane. And this is all anecdotal, right? Because this is just where I live. But I live, in a pretty populated area, and I've been to probably 5 or 6 game stores in the last couple weeks just in my area, and some of them carry Mythic and Nostalgics. I think maybe one of those stores carries Sorcery and none of the other games. So it's all about perspective too, you know. But that's all we really have time for today. Make sure you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you think about it, how you feel about it. Let me know. Again, this is all my perspective. It's not a right or wrong answer, and you know, you guys having opinions is not going to be right or wrong either. But let's have some dialogue down below. Drop your comments. I'll respond to all of them I can, and make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. But that's all we have time for today. I'll see you guys in the next one.